Welcome along to Eye on Africa, our daily look across the continent here on France 24. Our top stories. Niger's military junta expels France's ambassador to the country as it digs in its heels, insisting on a 3-year transition of power. It comes after the coup leaders said they would allow in junta forces from neighbouring countries if foreign troops were to intervene. Regional observers say Zimbabwe's election did not meet democratic standards as voting ran into a second day amid reports of delays, banned rallies and polling irregularities. The ruling ZANU-PF party of President Emmerson Mnangagwa dismissed the criticism as biased. And Gabon heads to the polls this Saturday in elections that could see the president extend his family's 55-year political dynasty. Ali Bongo is seeking a third term in a vote that combines presidential, parliamentary and local elections for the first time. Thanks very much for joining us here on France 24. First up, the military junta in Niger has expelled France's ambassador. The announcement made just a short while ago. The generals who deposed President Mohamed Bazoum last month gave Ambassador Sylvain Ité 48 hours to leave the country. This comes a day after the coup leaders said they would allow in junta forces from neighbouring countries if foreign troops were to intervene. The regional group ECOWAS has urged the junta to reinstate the president, saying it could resort to legitimate use of force to restore democracy. The bloc insists it cannot accept another coup in the region. Meanwhile, the UN has urged ECOWAS to facilitate the resumption of humanitarian aid in Niger as sanctions take their toll on civilians. Take a look.
Since Niger's coup last month, no more UN food aid is being delivered to the country. Borders with several nations from regional bloc ECOWAS have also been closed. Tons of provisions are stuck just outside of Niger, while domestic prices skyrocket. The NGO Kakara, a World Food Programme partner, gives cash to the most underprivileged.
We don't even have enough to buy a bag of corn, because nowadays a bag of corn costs too much. It would actually be better if they could provide us with food directly. There are 7 of us in my family, including my children and I.
In other parts of the country, the crisis cuts even more deeply. Some villages are running out of food supplies because the trucks that deliver them are stranded in neighboring Togo or Benin.
Previously, when we planned a distribution, food delivery used to take about a week. But now there are areas where it's been over 3 weeks since we've delivered any supplies since this situation began.
Over 3.5 million people in Niger are in dire need of food aid, and this number could quickly climb as ECOWAS sanctions continue to bite.
ECOWAS has been contacted to find a solution as urgently as possible, especially for humanitarian shipments. The humanitarian air service is also currently on hold because we don't have access to the fuel needed to operate the planes within Niger.
For now, no agreement's been reached to facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid into the country, but the clock is ticking with the remaining WFP's food reserves in Niger likely to last only a month, even as crucial supplies rot just outside the country's borders.
Next up, as vote counting continues in Zimbabwe, regional observers have criticised the conduct of the poll. Results are expected early next week. The presidential and legislative election was peaceful, but the Southern African bloc SADC said it fell short of democratic standards. Delays forced a second day of voting amid reports of banned rallies and polling irregularities, which left many voters frustrated.
We could not cast our votes due to the unavailability of ballot papers, particularly for local authorities. Yeah. So it was not possible to cast our vote. They were saying you can only cast your vote when all the ballot papers are available. That's for the council, the MPs and the president.
It was better to just tell the citizens to say, you know what, go back home, come back tomorrow. We have our elections tomorrow from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. than to bring just a little ballot papers. Then they make people wait without even communicating.
Some of the voters there in Zimbabwe. Well, the party of President Emmerson Mnangagwa, the long-time ruling ZANU-PF, dismissed SADC's findings as biased. During the vote, some 40 poll monitors were arrested as they tried to compile a parallel tabulation of the vote for comparison. To talk about this more, we're now joined by anti-corruption campaigner Farai Maguwu, Director of the Centre for Natural Resource Governance. Mr. Maguwu, thanks for joining us there from Harare. The SADC statement was a very strongly worded one. How does this compare with previous elections, and does it come as a surprise?
Indeed, it came as a big surprise, largely because the Zimbabwe crisis started in 2000, and since then, SADC has always sanitized these elections, especially when President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa was the kind of leading SADC in the intervention in Zimbabwe. They have always sanitized these elections. In 2008, Robert Mugabe was clearly beaten, and ZEC refused to announce the presidential results for 5 weeks. And after that, there was almost a civil war where citizens were attacked. It's estimated that more than 400 lives were lost. And still Thabo Mbeki came and he forged a government of national unity to serve the ruling party. In 2018, we had Nikuf, that Israeli firm, that came again and helped to manipulate the election. In 2018, again, there was post-election violence, shooting of citizens in the city. Again, SADC did not do much. So this statement, the preliminary statement released today, is a departure from the norm and kind of indicating that this time SADC does not want another disputed election, another 5 years of crisis where Zimbabweans are fleeing their country like they're fleeing a house that is on fire, mainly because the government is not accepted by all the contesting parties and, more importantly, by the voters themselves.
And we heard earlier of the arrest of those 40-odd election observers. What's your reaction to that?
Well, the arrest of those observers was very shocking. But of course, to us Zimbabweans, it's not shocking at all, because prior to this, there was a threat to introduce a law called the NGO Bill, whose intended purpose was to deregister all civil society organizations in Zimbabwe, except those which are registered as private voluntary organizations. And the target, we all knew, was this election, so that civil society will not play their role. Later on, there was another bill that sailed through Parliament, and the President ascended to it, which is the Patriotic Bill, which again threatened to punish anybody who speak to foreign organizations, foreign individuals or governments, about things which are perceived to undermine the interests of Zimbabwe, and in this case, the interests of the ruling party. So definitely these organizations were carrying out parallel voter tabulation, which is not a criminal offense under the Zimbabwean law. But I think it raised a lot of eyebrows as to what is it that government is hiding? What is it which, if these people are allowed to carry out the parallel voter tabulation, what will it expose in relation to what the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission is going to announce as the official results? So it raised a lot of questions as for the integrity, credibility, the fairness of the poll.
And indeed, we'll be keeping across all of that as we await those results, of course, expected to be coming in early next week. For now, Mr. Farai Maguwu, Director of the Centre for Natural Resource Governance, thank you very much for your time. Next up, Senegalese families have welcomed back some 40 survivors from a migrant fishing boat that was adrift for over a month in the Atlantic. More than 60 people died, mostly from starvation, as the pirogue drifted off course. The migrants had been hoping to get to Spain's Canary Islands and onward to Europe. Our correspondent Sarah Tirai reports from the village of Fasboy, where the boat departed from.
After weeks of suffering, there's finally a sense of relief. The 38 survivors are back home in Senegal after getting lost at sea in mid-July. Their return was organized by the Minister for Senegalese Abroad.
I would like to pay tribute to the memory of those who disappeared at sea during their journey. At the time of the rescue, 7 bodies had been found.
The migrants departed from Fasboy, a fishing village about 100 kilometers north of Dakar. The community is devastated. They lost 60 young people, most of them starving to death in the drifting pirogue. The survivors are still being looked after. Abdou Karim lost his son, nephews and 2 grandsons on the boat. He mourns the loss of his relatives.
It's very hard. I can tell you how sad it is to lose people who are very close to you. We put our hope in God.
There's been a surge in migrants arriving at the Canary Islands, 4,000 kilometers off the Senegalese coast. For the young fishermen from Fasboy, it's unemployment and the lack of opportunities that's pushing them to leave.
There are no more fish in the sea. Fishing is no longer an option. I think that's why young people are risking their lives at sea trying to reach Europe.
At the end of July, the government presented a new strategy intended to fight against irregular migration, in particular by strengthening coastal surveillance.
Finally, Gabon heads to the polls this Saturday in elections that could see President Ali Bongo extend his family's 55-year political dynasty. Bongo is seeking a 3rd term in a vote that for the first time combines presidential, parliamentary and local elections. Also, there'll be no runoff in the presidential election, a change which the opposition says favours the incumbent. Emerald Maxwell tells us more.
He's travelled the length and breadth of Gabon this presidential campaign, a far cry from his frail television appearances following his 2018 stroke. Ali Bongo is seeking a 3rd term in office with promises of higher family subsidies.
The aim of the Social and Republican Pact is to rebuild our country's social and economic model, to provide it with a solid foundation on which to protect itself serenely into the future.
Unlike his rivals, Ali Bongo and his party are plastered across the country. Bongo has ruled since 2009, when he was voted in to succeed his father, Omar, and then was re-elected in 2016 with a disputed wafer-thin majority. This time the vote will be held in a single round, thanks to a reform of the constitution that the opposition says rigs the election in the incumbent's favour. Despite that, Gabon's main opposition parties have risen to the challenge, agreeing on a joint candidate just a week before the vote. Former Education Minister Albert Ondo Ossa is seeking to end the Bongo family dynasty after more than 55 years in power and promises to address economic inequality.
I'm here for all of you, for the hungry, for the poorly housed, for the homeless, for the widows, for the orphans, for the mistreated.
The small West African state is, in per capita terms, among the richest on the continent, thanks mostly to its oil resources. But a highly unequal distribution of wealth keeps a third of the population below the poverty line, and nearly 40% of Gabon's youth are out of work.
And that's all for the moment here on Eye on Africa, but do stay with us in just a few minutes' time. It's Mike to Monty Francis with all the international headlines.